In a family where almost every grown child has drifted away from their father, there is one son who keeps showing up to defend him. While his siblings distance themselves, while the audience piles on, while the narrative hardens against Kody Brown, Paedon Brown keeps stepping into the line of fire to push back. He is, in many ways, the lone defender, and that makes him one of the most interesting and most misunderstood figures in this entire family. Because everybody loves the story of the kids who turned away from Kody, nobody quite knows what to do with the one who didn't. So tonight, I want to talk about Paedon, the son standing almost alone on his father's side, why he might be doing it, and what it's costing him. Let me start by acknowledging the obvious, which is how unusual his position is. The dominant story of the Brown next generation is distance. Kids who left, kids who criticized, kids who quietly built lives without their father at the center. That's the arc the audience has embraced, and frankly, it's the arc the evidence mostly supports. And then there's Paedon, who has, in various public ways, declined to join that chorus. He's pushed back on certain narratives about the family. He's been willing to offer perspectives that complicate the simple story of Kody as a pure villain. In an environment where defending Kody earns you nothing but backlash, Paedon has kept doing it. And whatever you think of his views, that takes a certain stubbornness, maybe even a certain courage. Now, I want to be careful and fair because Paedon is a real adult with a real perspective. And the easy move, the move most of the internet makes, is to flatten him into the family traitor or the deluded one. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about the publicly visible positions he's taken, treat them as sincere, and try to actually understand them rather than just dismiss them. Because here's the thing. The fact that Paedon's view is unpopular doesn't make it wrong. A person standing against the crowd is sometimes just wrong, sure, but sometimes they're seeing something the crowd has decided to ignore. Either way, they deserve to be understood before they're judged. So let's ask the real question. Why would Paedon defend a father that most of his siblings have turned away from? And I think there are several genuinely plausible answers, none of which require him to be foolish. The first is simply that his relationship with Kody may be different from his siblings' relationships. In a family this large with multiple households, every child had a different experience of their father. It's entirely possible that Paedon's personal relationship with Kody was warmer, or at least less wounding than some of his siblings. If your experience of your dad was genuinely different, then your loyalty to him is genuinely earned, and the criticism others level might honestly not match the father you knew. The second possibility is about fairness itself. Some people are wired to defend whoever they think is being unfairly piled on, and there is no question that Kody has become the family's universal punching bag. It's possible Paedon looks at the relentless, one-sided demonization of his father and feels compelled to provide a counterweight. Not because he thinks Kody is perfect, but because he thinks the wall-to-wall condemnation is unfair and incomplete. There's something almost principled in that. The instinct to say, wait, he's still a human being, and he's still my dad, and this pile-on has gotten out of hand. Defending someone everyone else has written off isn't always denial. Sometimes it's a refusal to dehumanize. The third possibility is the simplest and most human of all. He's his father's son, and he loves him. Strip away all the analysis, and you're left with a basic truth that we sometimes forget in all the drama. These are a parent and a child. Whatever Kody's failures as a husband or even as a father to others, Paedon may simply love his dad and not be willing to abandon him just because it's the popular thing to do. Loyalty to a flawed parent isn't a character defect. For a lot of people, it's one of the most natural things in the world. You don't stop loving your father because the internet has decided he's the bad guy. And there's something quietly admirable in a kid who refuses to. But let me also give voice to the other reading, because this channel doesn't do one-sided portraits, and Paedon's defenders aren't the only ones with a point. The more critical interpretation is that Paedon is in denial, or that he's siding with his father out of a need that's more about himself than about the truth. Maybe he can't bring himself to see his dad clearly. Maybe defending Kody is a way of protecting his own childhood, his own memories, his own sense that the family he grew up in wasn't as broken as everyone says. In that reading, the defense isn't really about Kody at all. It's about Paedon needing the story to be okay. And honestly, that's a very human possibility too. We all have a stake in believing our families were better than they were. The truth, as usual, is probably some mixture. People are complicated, and Paedon is likely defending his father out of a genuine tangle of real love, a different personal experience, a sense of fairness, and maybe some self-protective need to not see his childhood as a tragedy. All of those can be true at once. What I want to resist is the lazy conclusion that he's simply wrong or simply brainwashed. He's a person making sense of his own family in his own way, and his way happens to cut against the grain. That doesn't make him a fool, it makes him a dissenter. And every family conflict has at least one. Now, let's talk about what this position actually costs Paedon, because it isn't free. Standing as the lone defender of the family's most criticized member puts him in a brutal spot. He takes backlash from the audience, who largely side against Kody. He's at odds, at least publicly, with siblings who've taken the opposite view, including, as we've discussed, a sharp and visible rift with Gwendlyn. And he occupies a lonely position within the family narrative, the odd one out, the one who didn't follow the others. There's a real isolation in being the only one defending the person everyone else has left behind. Paedon pays a social and familial price for his loyalty, and he keeps paying it. That persistence, whatever its source, isn't nothing. I think there's something worth examining about how the audience treats a figure like Paedon, because it reflects on us. When someone takes the unpopular side in a beloved narrative, the temptation is to attack them, to treat them as an obstacle to the satisfying story we've all agreed on. The story we like is the one where the kids see the truth and turn from their father. Paedon complicates that story, and so the audience often wants to discredit him. But a healthy way to engage with this family, and with any story, is to let the inconvenient figure exist, to allow that someone can sincerely see it differently. Paedon isn't ruining the narrative. He's reminding us that the narrative was always more complicated than the version we preferred. Let me make a broader point about families and loyalty, because Paedon's situation speaks to something universal. In almost every family that goes through a painful rupture, the children don't all land in the same place. Some side with one parent, some with the other. Some refuse to take sides at all. And the ones who defend the less popular parent are often treated, by everyone else, as if they're betraying the truth. But loyalty to a flawed parent is one of the most common and most human responses there is. Most of us know someone who stayed loyal to a difficult father or mother long after others gave up. It's not a weakness. It's the heart's stubborn unwillingness to give up on someone it's bonded to. Paedon is living out one of the oldest patterns in human families, the child who won't let go. So here's a question worth sitting with. Is it possible that Paedon, the lone defender, actually sees something real that the rest of us, swept up in the anti-Kody consensus, have stopped being able to see? I'm not saying Kody is secretly a great guy. The evidence of his failures is substantial, and we've covered plenty of it on this channel. But I am saying that a family is never as simple as hero and villain, and the person who insists on defending the villain might occasionally be the one preserving the inconvenient truth that the villain is also a human being, a father, a person with his own wounds. Paedon might be wrong about a lot, but he might also be holding on to a piece of the picture the rest of us have been too eager to drop. So when I step back and look at Paedon Brown, the lone defender, here's what I see. I see a son whose experience of his father may genuinely differ from his siblings. I see a person willing to take a beating to push back against what he sees as an unfair pile-on. I see, quite possibly, a kid who simply loves his dad and won't abandon him for popularity. And I see the price he pays for it. Isolation, backlash, a rift with his own siblings. Whether he's clear-eyed or in denial, I genuinely can't say for certain. But I can say this. In a family where almost everyone took the easy, popular side, Paedon took the hard, lonely one. And whatever else that is, it isn't nothing. Let me dig into the dimension of being a son specifically, because I think it matters in ways we don't always consider. Fathers and sons often have a different kind of relationship than fathers and daughters, shaped by different expectations, different forms of bonding, different wounds. It's entirely possible that Kody related to his sons in ways that built genuine connection, even if his relationships with some of his daughters were more fraught. A father can be failing in his marriages and still have a real, warm bond with a particular son. So when Paedon defends Kody, part of what he may be defending is a father-son relationship that the audience never fully saw, one that existed in moments off camera, in the specific texture of how a dad and his boy related. We're judging Kody's fatherhood by what aired. Paedon is responding to what he actually lived. I also want to talk honestly about the machine Paedon is up against when he defends his dad publicly, because it's brutal. The internet has largely decided the Kody story, and anyone who complicates it becomes a target. Every time Paedon pushes back, he's not just disagreeing with a few people, he's stepping in front of a massive, motivated audience that has emotionally invested in seeing Kody as the villain. That audience can be relentless. It can twist his words, question his motives, mock his loyalty, and frame his every defense as proof that he's either stupid or complicit. Choosing to keep speaking under those conditions is genuinely hard. Most people would simply go quiet to avoid the abuse. The fact that Paedon hasn't told you his conviction, whatever its source, runs deep enough to withstand a lot of incoming fire. And consider what Paedon represents to Kody, because in a way, he may be one of the most important people in Kody's current life. Think about Kody's situation. Wives gone, many kids are distant, the public turned against him. In that landscape of loss, a son who still publicly stands by him isn't a small thing. Paedon may be one of the only people left openly in Kody's corner. For a man who has lost so much of his family's loyalty, that one remaining defender has to mean a great deal, even if Kody would never fully say so. There's a poignancy in that. The isolated father and the lone loyal son holding a connection that the rest of the family and the entire audience are pulling against. Whatever else you think, that bond is real, and it's costing the son something to maintain. There's a risk I want to name directly because I think it's important, and it's about us, the audience. When a family member takes the unpopular side, there's a temptation to weaponize their loyalty against them, to treat their defense of a flawed person as evidence that they themselves are bad or broken. That's not fair, and it's not healthy. Paedon defending his father doesn't make Paedon a villain. It makes him loyal, possibly to a fault, but loyalty to a fault is a very human failing, if it's even a failing at all. We should be able to disagree with his conclusions about Kody without turning Paedon into a secondary target. The pile-on instinct, once it gets going, doesn't know where to stop, and it ends up consuming the kids right alongside the parent. Here's a thought experiment worth doing. Imagine, just for a moment, that years from now, the full story comes out, and it turns out that the relationship between Kody and Paedon really was different, really was warmer, really was more loving than the public ever knew. In that world, Paedon wasn't deluded at all. He was simply the one child telling the truth about a relationship the cameras never captured, while everyone else projected their own experiences onto him. We can't know if that's the case, but the possibility should make us humble, because if there's even a chance Paedon is accurately reporting a real bond, then all the people mocking his loyalty are mocking a son for the crime of loving his father and refusing to pretend he didn't. That should give us pause. Now, the opposite could also be true. It's possible that as Paedon gets older and gains distance, his view of his father will shift, the way it has for many adult children who needed time and perspective before they could see a parent clearly. Loyalty in your 20s can look very different from loyalty in your 40s, so Paedon's current defense may not be his final word. People grow, reassess, and sometimes the fiercest defender becomes, years later, the most clear-eyed critic, once they feel safe enough to look directly at what was hard. If that happens for Paedon, it won't mean he was lying now. It'll just mean he wasn't ready yet. And that, too, is deeply human. I keep coming back to the simple fact that every fractured family has a Paedon. There's almost always one child who can't or won't join the consensus against a parent, who keeps the door open, who absorbs the family's frustration for it. Sometimes that child is in denial. Sometimes that child is the only one still extending grace to a person who, for all their failures, is still family. Often it's both at once. The role is thankless. The others resent it. The parent leans on it, and the person playing it rarely gets credit for the love and loneliness it requires. Paedon is playing one of the oldest, hardest roles in the human family, and he's playing it in front of millions of strangers who have already decided he's wrong. So, whatever you ultimately conclude about Paedon's judgment, I'd ask you to hold a little compassion for his position. He's a son who, for whatever mix of reasons, refuses to abandon his father at the moment that father is most abandoned. That refusal might be denial. It might be love. It might be a stubborn sense of fairness. It might be all three, but it is not nothing, and it is not contemptible. In a family where leaving became the celebrated choice, Paedon made the unfashionable one, and he's paying for it quietly, every single day. The least we can do is see him clearly enough to recognize that even the lone defender is a human being, doing the best he can with the father he was given. And maybe the most useful way to hold Paedon is to see him not as a verdict on Kody, but as a reminder about families in general. Every family that breaks apart leaves its children to sort the pieces, and they never sort them the same way. One kid keeps the anger, another keeps the love, another keeps the confusion. None of them is simply right, because they're each holding a different true fragment of the same complicated whole. Paedon kept the love, or at least the loyalty, and his siblings largely kept the grievance. Put all their perspectives together, and you'd probably get closer to the real Kody than any single one of them could give you alone. So instead of asking whether Paedon is right or wrong, maybe the better question is what piece of the truth he's carrying that the rest of the family, and the rest of us, decided to set down. Because in a story this tangled, even the lone defender is holding something the consensus left behind. So I'll turn it over to you, because I really want your honest take on this one. Do you think Paedon is loyally defending a father he genuinely knows differently? Or do you think he's in denial about who Kody really is? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Is there value in the family member who refuses to pile on, even when the criticism is largely deserved? Tell me where you land, because this is exactly the kind of question where I want to hear all sides, and I read every comment. If you want me to do a full profile on Paedon, his relationship with Kody, and how it differs from his siblings, let me know, and I'll build it with the same fairness I tried to bring tonight. And if you appreciate that we take even the unpopular figure seriously as a real human being instead of just dunking on him, then do me a favor and subscribe, because that kind of fairness is exactly what we're about. And there's so much more of this family to understand.